In this video, I'll explain fiscal policy. Fiscal policy can be defined as the government's ability to impact short-term aggregate demand and long-term potential output through spending and tax policy. Remember that aggregate demand is made up of the demand by consumers, businesses, the government, and foreigners. The government can increase the amount of output in the economy by using expansionary fiscal policy. The government can do this by lowering taxes, increasing its own spending, or a combination of both. By reducing taxes on businesses and individuals, these groups will have more disposable or after-tax income. This will allow them, in theory, to spend more of this disposable income in the economy. And when businesses and consumers demand more goods and services, it shifts aggregate demand to the right, increasing the level of output in the economy and helping to fix the recessionary gap. An increase in government spending will have a direct impact on aggregate demand, as government demand is part of AD. So when the government demands more goods and services as a result of an increase in spending, aggregate demand will shift to the right, also helping to reduce the recessionary gap. If the economy is experiencing an inflationary gap, the government could use contractionary fiscal policy to contract the economy. The government would do this by decreasing spending or increasing taxes on individuals and businesses. An increase in tax on individuals and businesses would give them less income after they pay taxes. Therefore, in theory, they will demand fewer goods and services, which will reduce aggregate demand, helping to shrink or eliminate the inflationary gap. A decrease in government spending will have a direct impact on aggregate demand. As was mentioned before, government demand is a part of aggregate demand. So if the government is spending less and demanding fewer goods and services, aggregate demand will shift to the left or decrease, also eliminating the inflationary gap. In the Keynesian model, a decrease in aggregate demand doesn't always necessarily lead to a decrease in average price level. This is due to the idea and the concept called sticky wages. Keynes very famously came up with a concept that when aggregate demand decreases, costs of the factors of production, especially labor, don't decrease due to three main reasons: minimum wage, worker contracts, and the power of unions in negotiating higher wages and salaries for its workers. As a result, in order to reduce business costs, businesses will need to lay off or fire workers, which will lead to a decrease in output. So when there's a drop in demand, the level of output, according to Keynes, will drop at a much greater rate than the average price level. For the monetarist new classical approach, however, any drop in output will be met by a similar drop in average price levels. This model is based on the idea or the theory that when aggregate demand and output drops, there'll be less demand for all of the factors of production, including labor. Therefore, the costs of all the factors of production, including wage, should drop. And when this occurs, businesses will face lower costs of production. A monetarist new classical economist might agree that minimum wage, worker contracts, and unions prevent prices from dropping when there's a drop in output. However, they would argue that eliminating minimum wage, eliminating worker contracts, and eliminating unions would make the economy work much more efficiently. We've just seen that fiscal policy can have a direct impact on aggregate demand. However, fiscal policy can also have an indirect impact on potential output. This can happen in a couple of different ways. First, by lowering business taxes, businesses can be incentivized to produce more as a result of having lower costs of production. This can increase the aggregate supply curve in an economy and shift potential output to the right. Also, if the government chooses to increase its spending to improve the quantity or quality of the factors of production, this will also make the economy more efficient and productive, shifting the aggregate supply curve to the right and increasing potential output. Examples of this could be investment in education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Another important idea related to fiscal policy is the concept of automatic stabilizers. If the government puts in place unemployment benefits and a progressive tax system, the economy will trend back to potential output without any further government intervention. This is how it works. If the economy is operating at a level below potential output, this means that there's some unemployment in the economy. There'll be less overall income being earned and more people out of work. As a result, the government will increase its spending on unemployment benefits. Therefore, an increase in government spending will naturally shift aggregate demand to the right. Also, by receiving unemployment benefits, citizens that don't have work will be able to demand more than they could if they didn't receive the unemployment benefits. Also, when people receive less income, there'll be a lower income tax burden with a progressive income tax system in place. Therefore, people will have more disposable income and should be able to demand more, increasing the aggregate demand curve and eliminating the recessionary gap. If there's an inflationary gap in the economy, there's more income being earned and more people employed. Therefore, the government will spend less money on unemployment benefits, naturally shifting aggregate demand to the left. And as incomes increase in the economy, a higher percentage of the incomes will be taxed through a progressive tax system. This means that people will have less after-tax income to spend, therefore decreasing, in theory, aggregate demand and eliminating the inflationary gap. Let's now evaluate fiscal policy. One of the big benefits of fiscal policy is the direct impact that some of the policies have on aggregate demand. Government spending, for example, directly impacts aggregate demand, as the demand by government is part of aggregate demand itself. However, in a deep recession, cutting taxes for businesses and individuals doesn't necessarily lead to an increase in aggregate demand. If people have lost their jobs or are losing their jobs, they might not necessarily spend the extra disposable income that they gain. Another potential problem, especially with dealing with inflationary gaps, are political constraints. In order to try to reduce economic activity during an inflationary gap, the government would have to reduce its own spending and increase taxes. In theory, this would work very well in decreasing aggregate demand and eliminating the inflationary gap. However, in practice, it's very difficult to encourage politicians to raise taxes and cut spending. In fact, very few politicians who are looking to become reelected would campaign on a platform of raising taxes and cutting spending on programs that their constituents enjoy. Another concern is crowding out. Crowding out occurs when the government is running a budget deficit. So if the government were to use expansionary fiscal policy, it might increase its own spending while decreasing taxes. This could lead to a budget deficit. In this scenario, the government would have to borrow money to pay off the deficit. This would reduce the amount of money left in the economy for individuals and businesses to borrow, therefore increasing interest rates. Finally, fiscal policy doesn't do a very good job at all of dealing with supply-side issues. If there was a drop in economic activity as a result of a drop in aggregate supply, fiscal policy would not be able to solve this problem without creating other problems of its own. If there was a drop in aggregate supply, that would mean that there would be a drop in output and an increase in average price levels. By trying to fix the inflationary problem in the economy, the government could plunge the economy deeper into an economic recession by decreasing its output. And by increasing output, the government would contribute to an increase in inflationary pressures in the economy. I hope this video has been useful in helping to explain fiscal policy. Linked in the description is a worksheet that you can use to help understand fiscal policy even better. Please like, share, subscribe, hit the notification button, and comment. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.